Guilty of war crimes, former Congolese militia leader Germain Katang has been convicted by the International Criminal Court, but is acquitted of charges of rape, sexual slavery, and using child soldiers. So, does this verdict really do justice to the thousands of victims in the east of the DRC? And is the ICC able to address impunity in Africa? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fuli Batibo. The International Criminal Court has delivered its verdict on the case of Congolese rebel leader Germain Katang. He was found guilty of war crimes as an accessory to the killings of 200 civilians in a village in the eastern DRC in 2003. Katang was also accused of rape and sexual slavery. While in early 2003, Germain Katang emerged as a senior commander of the FRPI militia, which was involved in the conflict in Ituri in the northeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 2004, Katanga was one of 6 former militia leaders appointed as generals in the DRC's army as part of a peace process. He was arrested by the Congolese authorities in 2005 in connection with the killing of 9 United Nations peacekeepers in Ituri. Katanga was held without charge until his transfer to the ICC in October of 2007. Al Jazeera's Neve Barker reports from The Hague.
Well, throughout court proceedings here in The Hague, Germain Katang remained somewhat relaxed, smiling occasionally. He was asked to stand for the verdict and he remained impassive throughout. The court here have found him guilty on 2 key charges of being an accessory to murder and also of pillaging. Both of these guilty verdicts are to do with a massacre that took place in a key strategic village in the east of the DRC, a village that borders Uganda 13 years ago, in which 200 people were killed. Some eyewitnesses of that massacre say that people were hacked to death with machetes, other people dragged from their beds and killed. Katang, though, has been acquitted on 2 key charges of recruiting child soldiers, of children under the age of 15 being forced to be part of the armed militia, and also he has been acquitted of rape and sexual violence as well. We now know that he will remain in custody. The court will now decide on a sentencing date, after which we'd have a clear idea of what his full sentence will be, how many years he will remain behind bars.
Well, joining us for today's Inside Story are our guests from The Hague. Jennifer Easterday, trial monitor for International Justice Monitor. That's a website specializing in trials taking place at the ICC. From Cambridge, Rob Williams, CEO of War Child UK, a charity for children affected by war. And from London, Tawanda Hondora, Deputy Director of Law and Policy at Amnesty International. But first, let's go to Fidel Bafilemba, who joins us via Skype from Goma in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Fidel is the Congo field consultant and researcher for the Enough Project, a non-profit organization with the stated aim of ending genocide and crimes against humanity. So how will the victims in Ituri will be reacting to this verdict against Katang today? Will they be satisfied?
Well, first of all, I need to clarify that this is the first international prosecution of sexual violence committed in eastern DRC. Well, there has been some local prosecutions, but this hasn't been to the satisfaction of the victims. So there is a lot of expectations amongst the Congolese population in whole, and particularly to the victims in Ituri, because this is landmark first ever international trial on sexual violence in Eastern Congo.
Indeed, it is the first trial on sexual violence in Eastern Congo, but he was acquitted of that particular charge. So how will the victims be reacting there to this?
Of course, they have been disappointed a little bit, but I think hope is coming back, and it's very high. And yeah, people, they're looking forward to listening, to understanding how this is going to go forward and what's going to be the end result.
All right. Tell us more about Germain Katang and who he was during the conflict in Ituri. He is alleged to have been involved in a massacre in the village of Borogo in 2003. What role did he play specifically in that attack? Was he an acting commander at the time of the massacre?
Well, like all the warlords in Eastern Congo, including Germain Katang himself and others, these are people who held the key positions, command positions, and nothing would have been done without the knowledge of these people. So that said, I think when I see the Lendu people, when I see the Hema people, everybody is expecting that at least justice is going to be on their side this time. So yes, I'm confirming here that Germain Katang and others, they held key positions, command position within their militias.
Right, but Katanga, you say, held a key position, but nonetheless, his co-accused, Machu Njugolo, who's also accused of having taken part in the Borogo massacre, was acquitted by the ICC.
So that was unfortunate. And anyway, justice system has its way of working, which is not necessarily reflective of what people had suffered, of what people might be expecting. But yes, these, like any warlord in Eastern Congo, whether it be Cheka or the FDLR commanders, nothing can be done without these people knowing it. One can find excuses that they do not have full control of their armies or militias, but this was not one-day massacre. It was done throughout weeks, months, things like that. And for these people to say, okay, they had an excuse of not having been aware of what was going on, or they could not have stopped it, no, that would be total lie. So that's why there is a lot of expectation from the Congolese people and the victims especially.
Okay, if I can ask you this one last question, Fidel. The ICC has held trials for 3 other suspected militia leaders in Eastern Congo, Ituri warlords, Germain Katang, of course, Thomas Lubanga, and Machu Njugolo, who, as I said before, was acquitted, and Katanga and Thomas Lubanga, on the other hand, were convicted. Have these cases against these 3 warlords brought any semblance of peace to Ituri? Have they had an impact on the situation in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo?
Contrary to the Kivus, for instance, where a range of armed groups is still wreaking havoc on the people, in Ituri it has become relatively calm. It's not safe 100%, but it is calm. And I think the way this trial is going to be conducted, it's going to send a strong signal to everybody who's still using big guns terrorizing people. So Ituri, it's kind of an example today, and I think it's giving less job to the UN intervention brigade forces compared to the Kivus, where, I mean, almost every day there are killings, there are battles, there are people being burned alive, there are rapes still going on. This is totally different from what is going on in Katanga. And yes, this trial is going to be one of a signal sent to these all warlords still working in the Kivus.
Okay, thank you so much, Fidel Bafilemba from the Enough Project, for joining us and giving us reaction there to this verdict at the International Criminal Court and giving us a view of the situation in the Ituri region of the DRC. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me now turn to Tawanda Hondora in London. From a legal perspective, Tawanda, what does this decision reached at the ICC mean exactly? Mr. Katanga has been found guilty of accessory to murder as a crime against humanity. What does that mean exactly?
Thank you for having me. What it actually means is that he's been found guilty of participating in a group of people who committed the act of murder and pillaging. He, as you indicated, was acquitted on the charges of rape and the use of child soldiers. But what is absolutely important about this case is that it highlights the role that international justice can play in bringing justice to victims. And in this particular case, we have a high-ranking member of a militia group who has been brought to justice. But on the other hand, it also shows perhaps the limitations of international justice and the need for countries such as the DRC to make sure that they strengthen the criminal justice systems, investigate people, bring charges, and prosecute them, in fair trials before their own domestic courts, because this is one person who has been found guilty, but he was not the direct perpetrator. The ones who directly perpetrated have not been investigated in the DRC. And I should also add that this is about events that happened in 2003. Worse events happened before 2003, and even more continue happening since 2003. And the DRC government must do more to bring people to justice.
Okay, let's bring in Rob Williams in Cambridge now. Rob, obviously I imagine you must be disappointed by the fact that Mr. Katanga wasn't convicted on the charges of using child soldiers. Do you think the ICC and the prosecutor were rigorous enough in building their evidence against Germain Katanga on those specific charges of using child soldiers and sexual slavery?
It's a really difficult thing to show, isn't it? We know that the evidence collection process has to take place in an area that was continually insecure during the evidence gathering phase, and the visit of the court to the scene of the crime was delayed by several months because it was simply too dangerous to get there. We do know that there's a forensic problem. If you're trying to prove that rape has happened, this case relied on eyewitness evidence, which was actually pretty compelling. But what we really need is on the ground some doctors and nurses who are trained to collect forensic evidence, and also police who are trained to take down witness statements in a way which will actually hold up in court. Some of the eyewitnesses who gave evidence in the trial were found to be contradicting themselves. And that doesn't mean that they weren't raped. It just means that their evidence was taken down and they weren't helped to be the kind of witnesses that really the court needed them to be in order to find a stronger finding of fact on that case. The UK government is now driving forward a process where in a summit in June they will gather over 100 countries to look at this specific issue. How do you collect evidence in the ground in order to make it possible to secure convictions of rape, which even in Europe are difficult convictions to achieve?
So what's been done for the victims, the child soldiers and those affected by the attack and the fighting in Ituri? What's been done for these communities?
That's a really good point. After all, the ICC is only part of a much bigger picture, which is how do you prevent this kind of rape and child abuse, and how do you deal with survivors? There are major investments in the region in child protection networks. World Child itself is running centres for children who have been abducted by armed groups, both boys and girls, and are now going through either reintegration back into their families, or where that's not possible, they're going through education and vocational training. And with that kind of support, people who have been child soldiers for a certain length of time can be helped to get through that trauma and actually can look forward to a very positive adulthood. My worry is that the programs which are currently there in the Kivus and in Ituri are not reaching anything like the numbers of children who would actually benefit from those programs. And we need a lot more funding to make that possible.
Right, a lot more needs to be done. That's what a lot of people who are working on the ground say. Jennifer Easterday in The Hague, let me get your reaction. Many people would say that Germain Katanga is a relatively small fish in the bigger picture. If you take a look at the situation in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, what do you think, what signal do you think this verdict sends?
I think this verdict sends an important signal about the international criminal justice process, that the process is complicated and does take time, and that these charges are not simple charges to prove. I think it also sends the signal that contributing to crimes, even through the provision of ammunition and weapons, can still lead to a conviction of these crimes at the ICC. I think for the grander conflict narrative, it's important to recognize that through this trial and through these factual findings, we do now have some judicial truth about the crimes that were committed. So even though Katanga was not convicted for the crimes of child soldiers, rape, and sexual slavery, the trial chamber did make findings on those crimes, and so we do have now more of a record to understanding what exactly happened.
Some judicial truth. Let me just ask you, you say judicial truth, but in all these trials, Jennifer, it seems that the ICC is still simply limiting itself to the activities of local militia men like Germain Katanga or Thomas Lubanga. Have they actually been examining who is giving these militias arm, who is supporting them financially? Have they been looking at that as well?
Well, I don't know specifically how the investigations have gone down, not being a member of the OTP, so I can't say specifically yes or no, but I do think that you've highlighted a very delicate problem that the ICC has, which is that in order to investigate or prosecute members of militias like Katanga or Ngujolo, they depend on the cooperation of the local governments in the local states. So although some government officials, including the president, have been implicated in these crimes that came out through testimony in this trial, in order to bring charges against those high-level officials, the ICC would then suffer on its cooperation, and so its investigations might suffer even more so than they have in these first trials that we've had. So it's a very delicate balance, and one that the prosecution and the chambers are constantly trying to maneuver.
Right. Tawanda Hondora, she makes an interesting point there. She says Jennifer says the ICC has a very delicate balance to make, because a lot of people also ask about the regional interference. You know, Ugandan troops, for instance, are alleged to have supported the Lendu militia to which Katanga belongs, and Thomas Lubanga and the Hema militia is said to have been receiving backing from Rwanda. Does the ICC, could they get help from those countries? I mean, could they try and involve those countries as well when they start these trials?
That is the role of the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC, and I'm sure that they do try to get as much assistance as they can from the regional governments and also from the government of the DRC itself. But perhaps that is focusing on the issue of the ICC only, perhaps is to miss the point. What we have is a situation where, especially in the DRC, in the eastern part, crimes being committed. The questions we need to be asking is, what is the government of the DRC doing? Are they investigating? Are they bringing to justice people who commit these serious crimes? The answer is yes, to a very limited extent, and they will point to insecurity. And the call that Amnesty makes and has been making for a long time is that the DRC government must redouble its efforts to make sure that it stabilizes the area in the Eastern DRC and it strengthens its criminal justice system. We make the same call to the international community, especially those that work hand in glove with the DRC government. That's the only way in which there'll be justice, but also stability for the people that live in the eastern part of the DRC.
Okay. Well, there's been a lot of focus on the Democratic Republic of Congo at the ICC, but the International Criminal Court has indicted 36 people, but Katanga is only the second person it's managed to convict so far. The first was a Congolese warlord, Thomas Lubanga, who was jailed for 14 years for recruiting and using child soldiers. 7 other people are in the pre-trial phase. They include Ivory Coast's former president, Laurent Gbagbo, who faces 4 charges of crimes against humanity for election violence in 2010, and Kenya's president, Uhuru Kenyatta, whose charges include murder and rape relating to the 2007 post-election violence in Kenya. And there are others who are wanted by the ICC as well. Joseph Kony, the leader of Uganda's Lord's Resistance Army, he's refused to sign a peace deal until his ICC arrest warrant is revoked. So, Tawanda, I want to ask you about Africa and the ICC. As you know, that a lot of people have accused the international community, International Criminal Court, of being biased against Africa and African leaders. Do you think that, Congo and all these are like experiments, perhaps, for the ICC? And can the International Criminal Court play fair in Africa, you think?
The International Criminal Court, and in particular the Office of the Prosecutor, does play fair. And if we look at the DRC, for example, it was the government itself that referred the situation. We have the same thing with Uganda, with the Lord Resistance Army. We're talking about Ivory Coast. Again, that's a similar situation. And Mali
but what do you
is another
respond
case.
to those who say that the ICC is using Africa as an international justice experiment?
It is not, because all these African countries that are subject to the ICC, for the most part, apart from Libya, voluntarily acceded to the Rome Statute. So meaning they are member states to the Rome Statute itself, they're members of the ICC. And the criticism that the ICC is focusing too much on Africa misses the point, because for most of these cases, it is the African countries themselves that invited the office of the prosecutor in the first place. And for the most part, because they felt they could not initiate investigations themselves. So that's the first part. And we then need to then ask the second question, which is, do the victims of the murders, the rapes, the child soldiers, do they demand justice? Do they deserve justice? The answer is an unequivocal yes. And the next question to ask is, what are the African countries where the ICC is involved doing? We might actually find that in very few of these countries are any real investigations and criminal trials taking place. So therefore, the criticism should be less against the ICC and more against the African governments who find themselves in situations of insecurity.
Jennifer, what's your view on this? You know, to many Africans, the ICC is seen as nothing more than a tool to extend colonial domination, often referring to the court, in fact, as the International Colonial Court. What's your view on this, and why do you think the ICC has failed to get support in many African countries, like Kenya today, some African countries threatening to withdraw from the Rome Statute, in fact?
I would agree that the ICC is not conducting any justice experiments in Africa, and I do think that while its attentions have been focused in Africa up until this point, it is in some ways also providing justice for those victims in Africa. And I don't think that it's a neo-colonial project. In general, it's trying to be as fair and efficient as possible. And as my colleague mentioned, these first trials were recommended to the ICC from the states themselves. So those are the cases that the ICC has had, and it is conducting preliminary examinations in a number of non-African states, and it is widening its investigations. But at this point, these are the trials that came out of those first situations that were recommended to the courts, and so those are the first situations and cases now that we're seeing come to fruition.
Your view on this, Rob Williams, and the criticism of the ICC, do you think that this, in a way, basically is one of the reasons that many of these cases and many of the people who've been victims of war in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, child soldiers and so on, is this the reason why there hasn't been justice for these people, because of the reluctance in Africa to cooperate with the International Criminal Court?
I look at it slightly differently. The fact that most of the cases, all the cases currently now going through a court process are African, is that actually Africa has engaged with this court to a much greater extent than the rest of the world. It is certainly not an American project to have an international criminal court. They haven't even signed the Treaty of Rome. It's not a Russian project either. They haven't ratified the treaty. And there are various places in the world crying out for the court.
Many African leaders say today that the court is subject to political manipulation. Countries like Kenya threatening to withdraw altogether.
Well, I think in Kenya you have the situation where the court is actually trying to put on trial a person who is actually still very powerful in Kenya. So the Kenyan position, I think, is coloured by that. The real problem with the court is that there's a huge gap between this fantastic world-class justice institution, which is actually operating superbly well in terms of the evidence that it gets, and a massive gap between that and villagers in the DRC who haven't really got a police force they can rely on, and you haven't got a local system. The ICC is supposed to be the court of last resort, but actually the gap between the crime and the last resort should be populated by a good local justice system, and that system is simply not there in many places. So
in your opinion then, in the case of the DRC, what needs to happen to tackle impunity in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo?
In the DRC, every single policeman has to understand their duty towards women and children to protect them from rape, to chase down those people who are committing rape. The fact about sexual violence in DRC is the proportion of it which is committed by armed militiamen is actually very small, less than 10%. Most of the rapes in the DRC, and it has indeed spiked because of the conflict, are perpetrated by civilians. As law and order breaks down, sexual violence has hugely increased. And the way to bring down the amount of sexual violence in these kind of conflict zones is okay, focus on men with guns, but also recognise that the main problem is the lack of law and order, and invest your money in training police forces and the justice system to look at civilians. What are they doing? How are they getting away with rape and sexual violence? The ICC itself is going to really struggle with that, even more than it does with our militia. So the key is keep investing in the ICC, but also invest in local justice systems.
And we'll leave it on that note. Rob Williams, thank you very much. Tawanda Hondora in London, thank you as well. And Jennifer Easterday in The Hague. Thank you. And thank you as well for watching. Remember, you can join this discussion online. Follow these links for Facebook and Twitter. From me, Fuli Batibo, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.